All right, so Mississippi State prep. These guys played really good the other night, as you saw. Had a chance to beat Georgia, and um, probably would have if Georgia wouldn't have had the new quarterback. So these guys have played really well on defense for most of the season. Give you a lot of problems. They play really hard. Really good players. They got back on track offensively. Versus really good Georgia defense. So, we're going to have our hands full. And, they kind of got turned around. Looked like they weren't playing great the few games before that, especially offensively. And then they got it turned around and, beat some drop 8, which I think had been, their issues lately. So, and even without all that, it wouldn't have mattered because rivalry games, you never know what's going to happen.
John Sokoloff, start us off.
How's it going, Lane?
Good.
Just wanted to know kind of what you, to the extent that you knew of like the rivalry of the Egg Bowl before you got here, based on like who you talked to, what you can kind of like expect for this specific rivalry and just like your thoughts on it.
Well, I'd known about it just from watching. I think used to be on Thanksgiving a lot, and then my brother being here for a number of years, so knew it was always really competitive and a big deal around here, and so it's a big deal.
Go to Parrish.
Playing with Otis having set out so much of the season, what is a reasonable expectation for him to be able to contribute in the game?
Well, I think a lot. Even though he's set out, he still practices all the time. He's in great shape. He's a great practice player. So he was always preparing like he was playing. So I would anticipate him playing a lot.
I know earlier in the season you were concerned about do you rep him as a starter or not. How did you manage that for him through the season?
Well, we hadn't. Once, they said, he'd lost whatever it was that we couldn't afford to use those reps. So he's been down on service team. He actually started this week playing receiver on service to help us over there because we were down numbers, until we found out.
Go to Joe.
Hey, how you doing, man? Joe Cook,
Good.
16WAPT in Jackson. I just wanted to get, what do you think the time off that you've had helps in the situation going into a rivalry game, especially for you coming in, in your first year? Or does it not help you because you guys have been playing so well as of late?
No, I would rather not have it, when you're in rhythm and playing well and, won a couple games in a row. So it is what it is. Hopefully we used it to get better at some things and, blessing with Otis, being able to play. Had we played, he wouldn't have been able to play, so that was good.
Go to John Zenner.
Yeah, Lane, I know you've probably been asked this before, but what makes Elijah so good to put up those kind of numbers the last 2 seasons, not just now?
Well, he's a great player, first off, but, he prepares really well. Very smart player, so, a lot of players wouldn't be able to line up outside, inside, and in the backfield all in the first series of the game. So, he's a true professional.
Did you see, I know you weren't there, but did you see the way last year's game ended, and did you address that to him? Try not to keep that on his mind, any advice for him?
No, I think that was a long time ago. I talked to him when I first got here about that, and learning and moving forward. So I don't think there was any need to. That was a long time ago, a lot of catches ago.
Go to Nick.
Lane, I know State's been having some numbers issues the last couple of weeks. Have there been any conversations about their status, or is everything good to go from what you've heard?
We have not heard anything. So fortunately, our guys did a good job. Over the weekend, even though he didn't play, we kept him around, and yesterday we were 100%, so hopefully we keep that up.
How do you plan on handling the holiday with that sort of stuff?
Well, we don't really, we're a morning format practice, so we don't change our schedule. When you're in the afternoon, a lot of times you got to move it up. So we just go like normal, and so they'll stay here, except for kids that could get that are really close, because we got Thursday to work, and then they're back here Friday morning.
Nate, go ahead.
But with State, I mean, they played probably the best game they played in 2 months this past week with those 40-some players. What they do differently, especially offensively, to kind of get rolling against a good defense?
Yeah, I mean, they were patient. They checked the ball down a lot. Georgia copied everybody's blueprint, drop 8 and keep the ball in front of them. And I think when you do that, they were thinking they'd screw it up, or they'd, force the ball and have some turnovers, which they had at times this year. And, they played a really clean game with no turnovers.
We'll go to Neil.
Hey, Lane, I know you focused on Mississippi State this week. I was just curious if you had heard anything or been told anything about when the Texas A&M game would be made up, or if games would get shuffled after this week.
Yeah, I've not heard anything. We're just focused on this one, and who's ever next will be next after that.
Go back to Parrish.
Lane, in your conversations with Elijah when you got here, did you have to convince him to stay? Was he considering leaving the program based on how last season finished for him?
I don't think so. I'd never heard anything about that. I think, before we were hired, talking to Keith, there was a lot of, kids saying they were leaving, whatever, but I think everybody stayed, actually. So, no, I didn't.
John, go ahead.
Lane, you mentioned kind of the parity in rivalry games before. Based on your experience in them, obviously in your years of coaching, what kind of added element does a rivalry, especially one of this magnitude of the Egg Bowl, what kind of role does that kind of play in any matchup?
Well, I mean, when it's in state, it's a big deal, and people talk about it impacting recruiting, which it can, so. And 2 new coaches. It's a big game, so we need to play really well.
And then a quick follow-up I had on that too. State sitting at 2-5 on the year, and obviously you've seen some of the struggles they've had, and taking a little bit of a step forward against Georgia. Do you think they're better than a 2-5 team, better than what their record says they are based on the tape you've seen on them?
Well, I think it just depends on which game you watch. Sometimes, just like the Georgia game, they could have won that game against a really good team on the road. Like I said, with a new quarterback that had he not been eligible and medically cleared, I think, they ran the ball for 8 yards. So he made a big difference throwing for 400.
Go back to Joe.
Yeah, Coach, what stands out about the Mississippi State defense? Seems like they've been the strongest suit all year for MSU, really keep them in games. What kind of stands out to you when you look at them off the?
Well, very unique scheme that gives you a lot of problems. Going back to San Diego State, and they play really hard, So obviously they got players that play hard and coaches that are getting out of them, because they play extremely violent up front.
Back to Nick.
Kind of the novelty this year of playing this game on a Saturday instead of the usual Thursday. Do you like the idea of going back to Thursday in the future, or do you kind of dislike the short week for a game like this?
I don't know. I think it's the same for both teams, so I probably really don't have an opinion. I would guess, Thursday gets more recruits watching you because, less games, so I don't know.
Go ahead, Nate.
But just kind of a game that in the past has gotten a little heated at times. Have you talked to Coach Leach about anything like that, or since you guys have taken the job, or recently? I
have not. I don't think that's normally, what you do. We've got to manage our teams, and we'll talk a lot to our team as we get closer to the game about, playing with great composure.